Upward Learning. We got another week, another show. Our guest today is the Executive Director of the Kalamazoo Academy for Behavioral Success, or KABAS. It's a nonprofit ABA K through 6 school, and the Senior Director of Behavioral Health and Academic Success at YWCA Kalamazoo. She completed her MA and PhD in Applied Behavior Analysis at Western Michigan University. She has extensive experience in the application of behavior analytic interventions to improve early and advanced verbal repertoires of children and youth with and without exceptional needs. She has experience delivering culturally responsive clinical and educational services for individuals from diverse backgrounds, working across settings such as EIBI and in K through 12 school settings. Her research focuses on the application of behavior analysis to improve literacy outcomes for children from underserved communities. Author, speaker, and lecturer. Welcome, Dr. Margo Uwayo. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for
yeah, we definitely want to dive into learn all about KABAS and the cool stuff you guys are doing there. Do you mind anything I might have missed in that introduction, and maybe talk a little bit how you got in the field and maybe where that intersection blend of behavior analysis, cultural responsiveness, and education kind of fell together?
Yes, I kind of grew up knowing I wanted to study psychology, but I thought I wanted to do clinical psychology and study trauma and work with children who've experienced trauma until I got to Western. And of course, I took, maybe at the time it was 3,600, Dick Millat's course in BATS. And I want to say Chase was a graduate student who was leading that lecture at the time. And it just made sense. And so at that point, I was, I want to say maybe I was a junior in college, and I just, it felt good. I felt like I was clear and I could understand and I could impact and really see the, outcomes immediately. And I'd been searching still. And so that's kind of how I started in behavior analysis. So I pursued that in undergrad, and I pursued an honors thesis with Dick Millat and BRSS, for those of you who are familiar with that. Kendra Combs was my mentor, actually. So I worked with her, and I happened to, at the time, I did an honors thesis on self-management and children in elementary school who were struggling with completing their work. So I went to my old middle school here in Kalamazoo, and I did like a little project there. And that really turned me on to behavior analysis and education, and, kind of sparked something there. So that's how I started. I finished undergrad and started working at the local psychiatric hospital. And while working there, I was like, oh my gosh, look at all these opportunities to apply, behavior analysis. And obviously I was an undergrad. I had my bachelor's, and I couldn't practice so that inspired me to go back to school. And, I'm an immigrant, and my parents didn't go to college here. And so I had to really figure out the system and how to pursue your master's and where to go and who to talk to and potentially get, like fellowship or scholarships or whatever. So I reached out to Stephanie Peterson. She was the chair at the time. And I said, hey, I really want to, continue, but I'm not sure what steps to take. And she asked me to meet with her lab. I told her my experiences and that I'd worked with BRSS and Dick Millat in my undergrad. And she then asked me to speak with him. And so I actually started my master's in a really weird way. I sat with Millat, and I told him about what I wanted to do. I had missed a deadline for application at that point, and he was like, just come to the classes. And so he had me come to the classes. He said, you do have to study for the, test and actually get in formally. But for right now, you can sit in the classes. I had already missed boot camp. So he said, you can do boot camp next summer. So he just worked with me, and the BATS students worked with me. And that's how I was ushered into the master's program. I did do my first year of master's with him. And then at some point during that year, he said, do you want to work with Denise Ross? He convinced Denise Ross to come over from, I think, Chicago. And her areas of expertise are special education, literacy, working with individuals from disadvantaged communities. And that's her area. And she's got her degrees from Teachers College, Columbia University. And I remember feeling so offended in some way, not because, Denise is amazing. She's been my mentor for a long time. But at the time I was like, are you kicking me out of bats? Can I do both? I was confused, and he was like, you can't, and I wanted to do it all. So he's like, you can't really do both successfully. So I think this is a really good fit. And he had foresight that I think I didn't have yet at the time. And so my second year of master's, I transitioned over to Denise's lab, where the focus was on literacy. So all of our research in the lab was around literacy, education, working with underprivileged individuals and communities, going into the schools and partnering with the schools and offering training and working with the children in there. So that's kind of how I started. And so I got my BCBA, and I still work with children with autism and other developmental disabilities. But then I focus heavily my second year master's and my PhD in literacy and children with and without exceptional needs.
Very cool.
It's interesting. I took a very similar path, at least early on. Went to Western as much to have fun as to learn psychology. Took Malat's class, applied for grad school. I got rejected. I didn't just apply late.
Yeah.
They let me stick around and take classes, and then I stayed on forever. So that was Chase Callard that was teaching your class?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. He was in my same cohort, and I feel like we need to call him out just so now he has to listen and be a fan of the show.
Yeah, he was awesome. Please call him out. If I could reach out to him, I would, because taking that course definitely sort of shifted the trajectory where I was going to go with my life. So it was a great class.
Kendra too. She's normally here. She's not here today, but we'll have to.
I know
that she was called out. Come on, Kendra.
This is the day she was supposed to be here, but she was. Yeah, she was great. She was a great mentor. She'd already finished her project, which is why I didn't get to work with a kiddo with autism. Was she'd already completed her data collection and all of that. Mm-hmm. And so she was like, I'll work with you. I'll help you out if you're able to figure out like some other, area to work in. And so I suggested that, and Mala and Kendra were on board. So they were very, very, very supportive.
Awesome. Well, let's dive into it then. Mind sharing the story behind KABAS? How long has KABAS been around? What's kind of the origin story there?
Yes. So some people say KABAS. I say KABAS. I don't.
I'm saying it wrong. Okay.
No, you know what? I don't really know if there's a particular way to say it. It's an acronym. It's a made up word. So
I'm pretty sure you get to decide right here and now how it's pronounced. So everybody's gonna hear it from now on.
I've been saying cool. KABAS for like 2 years.
I like that power. So I'll take it. KABAS is good. And I like that. It's similar to, it's inspired by the KABAS with a C at Teachers College in Columbia. So but that's the whole school. That's a comprehensive application of behavior analysis in schooling. That's Doug Greer and his crew over there at Teachers College, where Denise went. But KABAS seemed to fit Kalamazoo Academy. We wanted to be an academy and not a school. And I get into that, some of the politics around that, but we are a school, in fact, though. We're accredited by the Michigan Department of Education. And we started as a tiny reading program at the YWCA. So I want to say 2021, I was working in Illinois. I was an academy manager at a clinic, an ABA clinic over there. And someone told me Malat wants to start an autism school in Kalamazoo. And, he's got a couple of his alumni, grad students there, they meet once a month or whatever, and they're really trying to get things going. This is right after COVID, right? Like during that time. So I reached out and I was like, hey, I'm not in Kalamazoo, but I'm here in Illinois. I'm looking to do some things outside of my, normal work and continue my research and other additional things that I typically do. And I'm interested in helping out. I'll volunteer some hours, once a month and kind of help you guys out, given the experience that I have. And so he said, come on board. And I started to meet with everybody once a month. And at the time, it was Sophia Peters was there, Sydney Harborough, who else? Sydney Bordelli, Kelly Kohler, all these people were part of just kind of having that conversation and figuring out, do we want to be a private school, a charter school? Do we want to be a nonprofit at 501(c)(3)? And I always say that wrong. What is it that we want to do that would allow us to, as a school, make decisions about the type of curricula, the instruction that we do with as little oversight or as little requirement? You have to do this curriculum, you have to teach this way. So we kind of started those conversations, and a couple months in, they called me and he was like, hey, do you want to come start the school? It didn't have a name at the time. Do you want to come start the school? And I was like, yes, I do. I've never done this before. But I have the passion and I have the knowledge, I think, to add something cool. And at the time, I felt like there were a lot of people who were still in Kalamazoo that were interested in something like that, to where I can network and make the connections and get it going. And so I moved back to Kalamazoo. No school. There's no school. There's nothing. Basically, everything is on paper and in the Zoom meetings that we were having. And so when I moved back, I said, I think we need to make sure that it's an inclusive school, not just exclusive to individuals with autism. I think it has to be inclusive so that there are lots of other opportunities for other individuals who could benefit from behavior analysis, but that don't typically get access to those services. And so when I moved back, I contacted the executive director, the CEO of YWCA. I happened to have worked with her son back when I was the director of the reading program at Western with Denise. I was part of, I worked with him at that time, teaching him and as his BCB at some point. And so I reached out and I said, Dr. Grace, we really want to start this thing here, but we want to make it a nonprofit because we want to make it affordable and accessible to all communities. We are not sure exactly where to start. And she's obviously really well connected. And she said, I will absolutely help you guys. You can start your nonprofit in here, offer a reading program, offer a service to the community while you're building up, and I'll make the connections for you and help build your infrastructure. And also in the meantime, can you, bring some behavior analysis in, preschool and early child development? And we said, of course, yes. And so we started a small reading program a year in, as I was working on the proposal, submitting everything. I mean, it took at least 2 years for us to actually open. We didn't open our school until 2023. So from 2021 to 2023, we were providing a reading program, after school reading program for kids, I want to say preschool all the way to middle school, in the basement of the YWCA. I think it was me and a master student who was working on their practicum hours at first. And then we got another person. And then we got, and then I put it out there to my friends, and I started kind of building up the staff. Some of them are still with me now. And that's how it started. And then in the meantime, we did get, I worked with the YWCA and got them a grant to start behavior analysis in preschool. And so in their preschool classrooms, we were able to get some behavior analysis going. And I got I think, Dr. Jessica Van Straten to come over with her graduate students on this grant to implement behavior supports, early literacy work with all these kids in the YWCA. So I was kind of doing both. I've been doing both, but that's how KABAS started, small reading program. And then we at some point partnered with another organization, Centerpoint, and that's where we are now. We found a space, we got it renovated, we went through licensing, and that was like a whole headache. Like I literally didn't get final approval of the space until the week before school started. And I was freaking out. I was like, okay, so what are we going to do? I have to tell all these parents that enrolled. Just kidding. We can't start because Lara, it was stressful, but we were like, we'll just make it a tutoring program. Malai is very creative with stuff. Like, we're still going to do it. We're going to have everyone homeschool, and then they'll all come to do tutoring at KABAS. And that's how we'll get this thing going. But luckily, we were able to get things started.
That's amazing. I'm jealous. I always stop at it would be a cool idea if standpoint, and then there's people who actually just go and do stuff and make it happen. And it's inspiring. It's like, oh yeah, you can make partnerships and actually do things, Kyle. You just try and make it happen. It's cool. It's a cool story.
It's possible, but I will tell you, it's a lot of work. But I mean, you got to have the commitment and the energy and the support. And I think Mola already had a team that was really supportive, and the board is super supportive. And I just was like, sort of the driving force. We're going to make this happen. That was my thought. Like, I don't know how, but it's going to happen. I can see the vision. I can see it happening. Let's just go for it. So it can definitely happen. Yeah.
So going through, licensing processes for different types of organizations, we at least have a glimpse of what that probably was like. Would you say it was very much Dick's normal ready, fire, aim approach, or did you bring some more aim to it ahead of time so you had a little bit more clarity going into that?
Oh, I have no idea. I had no idea. I was just really, I would say lucky, blessed. I was the people that we partnered with, it turned out all of them had the same kind of vision, maybe not for school, but they were already in spaces of servitude. And they really wanted to, like Centerpoint, they had a space. It was not being used really, to its max capacity. And they really are about connecting with, the community and individuals with disabilities or individuals who are marginalized from marginalized communities. So when we told them, they were like, yes, we'll definitely help you. And we have connections, excuse me, with Oshimo, because we have a preschool on the other side of the building. So we've worked with them before. We had to go through zoning, and we had to go do a, presentation and tell them what we're doing at the Oshimo Township, committee. And then as far as Lara, that was just a mystery. I couldn't so I'd go online and I'll do my research. Here's who you contact and here's where to go. And then I'd contact them and they'd send me back to somewhere else. But luckily we got an architect who was really familiar with the steps. And so he was like, okay, between those two different people and organizations, I was able to navigate and eventually figure out step 1, step 2, but go back to step 1 and then 1A, 1B, and then, back to 3. And we were able to sort it out. So I just was like, people will help me. Okay. I'm just going to focus on the mission and help will come. And it did.
Yeah. My approach is always like, hey, let's do it. And then I'm like, hey, Nick, hey, Kyle, somebody just do this and figure it out. All right.
Yeah.
Oh, I had never noticed that.
I was kind of laughing when you're talking about Lara, because I'm going through that right now. There's a lot to do. There's a lot to provide, and there's also a lot of waiting as well.
Yeah, don't get me started on the waiting. I was pulling my hair. I was like, okay, is it happening? Is it not happening? Is it, because we couldn't do anything without, okay, you do have the space. Now we can recruit. Now we can, we have the website. We have parents who are interested. We have, there was just a lot that hinged on, are we going to get that, final approval for the school space? And we looked for a building for a year. While we were at the YWCA, we got, we were looking, and every space we found was either, the zoning would have to be shifted, or the building had to be brought up to code, and that was going to be a lot more expensive. And thankfully, this wasn't that situation. It was just renovating a few things to fit what we needed. But the waiting, I became a master of patience. I became really patient through this process, and knowing that things eventually work out. You just have to keep going. Yeah.
So let's talk about what a typical day at KABAS looks like, or KABAS, and how the science of behavior analysis kind of permeates into the decision making, to staff training, to the education, behavioral services, things like that.
Okay. Man, Nick, you might have to help me out with some of this from your perspective.
Yeah, I totally can jump in, but no, you're the master. You go ahead.
So a typical day, let me start with staff training, because that was one of the biggest things. And when we initially started, I hired and trained every person that came on board, because you got to remember, it's a blank slate, tabula rasa. We're building the processes, we're building the systems. I happen to have taken courses in OBM and all of that. And obviously, Mulad, that's his niche. So we're able to get some things set up as far as what training will look like. I did all the training. I did require I tried to recruit and hire RBTs. Because we knew that we're definitely going to work with kids with autism or other developmental disabilities or delays or behavioral issues. And we really want people to at least come in with that background. However, we didn't require it. We preferred it. I had at least 2 people who started with me at the reading program who did not have any experience in ABA, and they got turned onto ABA. And now they're both RBTs, and I think they want to pursue that coursework. But I think maybe one of the first things was they all needed to go through the RBT 40-hour module training. Mm-hmm. And then the next thing was I planned, at least like 2 weeks of staff training. And, at KABAS, we use all direct instruction curricula, explicit instruction. We use, we obviously do fluency-based instruction. We do a personalized system of instruction. So I had to pull it all together. And of course, behavior management, we implement a multi-tiered system of instruction, or MTSS. People know as PBIs, but MTSS is better, a bigger umbrella, so that you know that you're working both academic and behaviors at the same time and moving kids through the tiers. So I had to get everybody through those trainings. So I kind of conducted the first initial trainings with everybody. Some of the things that we have in place now is all the staff, based on the trainings that they received, they have goals. They have quarterly goals that they have to meet. We collect fidelity weekly for every staff member. Some of the areas, and I guess I won't go through all the details, but some of the biggest areas, key areas that we had to train was that learning how to interact with students in a way that is not just discrete trial, but that adds more to the conversation, to the interaction, because a lot of the kids we work with are highly verbal. So I found that people who came back from the ABA background had some difficulty, kind of applying those principles to kids who could talk back and argue back and, all of that. So I had to really train them on, like, here's how you apply those same principles to these learners who have a greater verbal repertoire, and how you still work through problem behaviors with that. So one of the key areas that we teach, I train staff on, is learn units, how to implement learn unit. And learn unit is that interaction between the teacher and the student, really understanding there's a function. What the teacher does impacts what the instructor or therapist does, impacts the student learning and the outcome. How you set up the contingency, how you set up the environment. And I really wanted to train them to think scientifically. When you do this, what happens? And then you have to go back and assess. Did it work? Did it not work? Okay, what is it that I can change about this whole interaction to get the outcome that I'm looking for? And how do I measure that on a daily basis? And so we went through training around that. Behavior management was a big area for training for them as well. And then literacy was a big one. And the reason for that is another key area, how to teach and how to really understand the impact of literacy on all academic areas. You cannot do science, social studies, and math if you can't read and comprehend what you're reading. And so I really have to go through and walk them through the, verbal behavior and how you build up, how it's a spectrum, and you go from tacting all the way to reading and writing and editing and what that looks like. So the training was pretty extensive, but we do have mentors at KABAS, where new staff members have a mentor who's been there, who's been through the training, who actually now deliver some of the training, so I could take fidelity, make sure that they're still, on the up and up. But that's kind of how the training went. Is we started with we're going to be doing lessons. We're going to be doing direct instruction. You got to know what it is, how to implement it, and you have to be able to teach other people how to do it. So as soon as they demonstrated mastery within the trainings that I did, then they were now training, other trainers, other teachers, so that we can continue that change. So that's kind of the biggest thing, was get the training going and help people who came from ABA to know how to interact in this larger setting, classroom wide. Like you might have a group of 4 students. How do you deal with 4 kids when you're used to working one-to-one? That was a really big challenge for some people. Those people who came from backgrounds where they didn't have ABA, that was easy for them. They could do a group of 3, a group of 4, a group of 8, they could manage all this stuff. But man, there was a lot of problem behavior, a lot of reinforcing inappropriate interactions and behaviors and reprimanding. And so another key area was teaching them, the praise to reprimand ratio and how to really manage a classroom. You got to keep it at 5 to 1. And that was tough. I had a certified teacher who came in at some point, and she worked with us, and she was great. She got all the training, but I certainly saw how the philosophy and the way of thinking about behavior is so different, so much different than what we apply, right? And she was into it, which was awesome. But then those individuals, I had to get into the ABA component and really teach about DTT and principles of behavior and reinforcement and all of those things. So it's like balancing, because we want to, have a lot of people apply, hiring was a really big issue because we're worried like people are going to be intimidated if they have never worked with kiddos who may have challenging behavior. If they have, but now they have to work with a group of kids that could also feel like this is not, so I wasn't sure. Yeah. So I got to a point where I was like, I will accept anyone who's of this, has some of this background, and I will be ready to train them. So I was like boots on the ground every day, training and supervising and modeling, and delivering feedback and having staff meetings and really graphing the staff's performance. That's another thing we do is we graph their performance so that they can see whether or not they're meeting their goals. I forgot the rest of your question.
I had a question. Anecdotally, what do you think is easier, teaching someone with a behavioral background how to handle a classroom type setting, or teaching someone from an education background how to be behavior analytic? Because I've done that side. I've worked in schools, consulted, and tried to work with teachers. And obviously, I had no control over the contingencies, so I didn't get to say, hey, we need you to do this for sure.
Yeah.
But I've never done it the other way. And so I'm just wondering, what is easier? I can definitely see what you're saying too. Like discrete trial training is not something I would do if I'm in there myself, but when you're trying to mass train people how to implement behavioral programming, that's the easiest way to do it.
Yes. I'm sorry, Steve. So I've done both in the past. Not at KABAS, I had to do both at once, right? This is where everything started to converge for me. Literally, all of the tools that I've, gathered, and skills that I've gathered converged at KABAS. I have gone into schools and trained educators. Contingencies, no, you have no control. Buy-in, you have to spend so much time getting them to buy in the first place, a lot of the times, or it's just, there's no support for them. There's little resources. And so you really have to get creative about what you're asking them to do and how they're going to do it, right? With the RBTs, it's challenging for them to think beyond this learner and really keeping it to just the usual, contingency. And so it's like, no, you look at the whole student. You have to think about, did they eat? Did they sleep well? What is it that they're communicating to you when they're engaging in these behaviors? Do you know and I know we think about those things in, ABA, but really those setting events have a huge impact on the classroom and how they interact. Are you able to look at their data throughout the day? If you're teaching a group of kids, you still have to take data for all of them. I think that was the biggest thing that was challenging. Like, how do we take data for 3 different kids? And and I'm like, oh, it's easy. Here's a sheet and here's their names, and you go in and because we take moment to moment data for all the kids. So we have all their responses every single day throughout the day. That was intense for them. Like they knew how to do it, but that was intense. So I'd say it's equally challenging for different reasons. However, because we don't have to spend oftentimes so much time explaining and teaching the principles and really building the foundation, it's often easier. A lot of really good, excellent RBTs catch up fairly quickly, and they're able to then become mentors. And that's what has happened in KABAS. They become mentors for people who are coming in. But then I found once we get through, we get people through and we train them, and now they go back and they do their RBT, man, they're really good at that stuff. And I was like, oh, wow. So you did learn some stuff, the data is there, but observing and really seeing growth has been exciting. So I'd say it's equally challenging for different reasons.
Yeah. Nick, did you have
I
anything to add?
remember
There you go.
Sorry, I just want to interject. I'm in a unique position because I'm a behavior analyst at BCBA, but I'm also a customer of KABAS. And so I remember dropping off my daughter in the morning and there was a questionnaire that really was centered around the setting events. Have they ate breakfast? How have they slept? There was a few other questions on there, but it was really trying to get an idea of the setting events going into the day. And so what I always imagined is that that questionnaire was then consulted, at the beginning of the day, just to double check, make sure everything seemed down the middle. And if there was outliers, no, they slept horribly. No, they refused to eat. They were, then it's like, okay, we can go into the day kind of understanding like some motivating operations might be a little wonky right now. And so we just have to, kind of expect that and respond. But no, we don't have that as much now, but I feel like as a BCBA looking at it, it feels like the staff are so well trained that maybe that information isn't necessary up front, and they've gotten really good at being able to identify those without that information necessarily. And I'm really impressed that you were able to train your staff to the level they have, because as a BCBA, you incidentally observe things, and if I ever saw something like concerning, I would certainly let you know, but that's never ever been the case. I'm always like super impressed by their ability to handle difficult situations and respond so fluently to those situations.
Yeah, that's really great to hear, Nick. I mean, some things I had to make really explicit at the beginning. You have to ask this and get in the habit of asking these things, and don't just assume, well, this kid is misbehaving, they're a bad kid. Like that is not a sentence I want to hear. And I'm pretty serious about stuff like that within the staff, like your verbal behavior about the children, especially when they can hear you, and around the staff and those it's easy to have sort of like a negative, that's what happens, right? Like complaining and upset. And so I try really hard to put contingencies around that for the staff. Like, I want to hear glows. I want to hear what's positive. Yes, I know it's hard. Yes, but we show up and we support. But I think maybe that goes back to your question, Kyle, about what the day looks like. Is it all started with heavy training. And the day for the staff generally is, the kids come in, we have a schedule for all of the classrooms. Now you have to remember the kids we're serving all are at different levels a lot of the times. Some of the initial things we do immediately is assessment. We have to know your level of performance. You may be a third grader, but you're performing in literacy at first grade level. Well, if that's true, I'm also not going to just give you a math at third grade level, because more likely than not, if you don't have the skills to read, information in front of you, we're going to see lots of problem behavior, right? Like you can't interact with materials in a way that feels successful. And so the first thing is, I train them all on assessments. We have, lots of informal assessments, curriculum-based measures, preference assessments. So this is where like things got funny, because we'll do some things for, preference assessments and surveys, and then we'll go into academics. Okay, now you have to do, placement tests and informal reading inventories and phonics surveys and math tests. And so that was an interesting thing for people to learn and to be able to know, like, these are the times that, when you make decisions to assess again and then to move forward. We do all mastery-based instruction, direct instruction, explicit instruction. And then we add programs, behavior analytic programs, for those kids who are missing some skills or just aren't necessarily directly taught within those curricula. And then we help them build those skills, and then we place them back in the lesson. So the teachers come in, they have an hour of prep. They receive the students, instructors, don't call them teachers, I'll get in trouble. They're not certified. Okay, that was one of the benefits of having a private school. You don't have to have certified teachers, but we call them instructors. So they receive the kiddos. One of the first things that they do first thing in the morning is snack and book. We do book club every day for every kid. And part of that is because we have to condition textual stimuli textual books, anything that has to do with literacy and math and all that. We have to condition those things as reinforcers. We also have to condition KABAS classrooms and teachers as reinforcers, because a lot of our kids don't want to go to school. We have, lots of like school refusal, lots of problem behavior because they've not succeeded in the past and for whatever other reasons. And so we really try to make it a positive space, really intentional. We collect data around interaction and engagement with textual stimuli. That's my area of research as well. So I love that stuff. And then, we let them, eat and have a snack or little breakfast with book club, and then they get into their lessons. So we typically split classrooms into emergent readers. Those are kids who are just learning to read. Readers, those are kids who are about on level, but maybe they're a grade behind. And then advanced readers, maybe kids who are at level or above. And so we split them into groups and we place them in homogeneous groups so that we can teach them that way. And so the teachers get right into it. And they start their day into, reading lessons and math lessons. And obviously there's lots and lots of, behavioral principles being applied. We don't start, especially within the first couple of weeks of school, we break down their day, sort of like how you would do DTTs. We might say, okay, hey, this kiddo is new, scheduled reinforcement is FR1. We're going to do this is the goal of target. And then we start to fade to the VR schedule. So we're really intentional about it. We also utilize yoked contingencies of reinforcement, meaning you got to work with a group. You can't just set up a contingency for one kid for 5 kids that you have. You can, but it's challenging. It's best and more efficient if you're able to do it for all kids. So yoked contingencies allow us to do that, where we really encourage kids to cooperatively learn. So that's, dependent, independent, contingencies of reinforcement. The kids against the teacher, they earn points, or, the teacher earn points when they mess up. And then they know that, oh man, they've lost a game for that activity, or, and they have time for reinforcers at the end of an activity or a lesson. And so we really break down the day like that. Some of our kids, we might be like, this kiddo is really struggling. So we really have to work with them one-on-one to start during the first couple of weeks. And then we push them into the group, because the goal is always to get to group setting. Because the world and the environment, and whenever they leave KABAS, having one-on-one is not always going to be feasible. But if we can teach you some of the big cuts, those behavior cuts, can you learn by observing? Do you have naming? Can you learn incidentally? Or, by looking at other contingencies? If we teach you one thing, can you understand something else? Can you do so in a group? Those are really big things that we target. And then, of course, all the academic things throughout the day. The kids also, we do lots of tutoring and in the classroom, meaning they all have to talk about what each other is doing well. We explicitly teach that, because otherwise what we get is all day, everyone blah, 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 did this and such, so we really try to model for them positive interactions, and we start to see that with each other. And they all take data on their, we do fluency based instruction. So they take data, they graph their own data, they're able to set goals. And so there's lots and lots of principles embedded. And their day typically starts at 9 a.m. and then we get done around 3:30. So it's a long day, but it's a fun day. And I can say that because some of our kids, their parents have told me they earn coming to KABAS, to tell them, no KABAS if you don't, and they do it and they're excited. And it's a reinforcer. So it has worked and it's been really exciting.
Oh, that's encouraging to hear as an instructor, I'm sure. I use this as a reward or reinforcer for my kid. And I'm just imagining, just hearing you talk as a BCBA who's sometimes invited into the school, sometimes get, an opportunity to train once, something, some element of the behavior plan, no data or some data sometimes. And I guess that's another question too, is, sometimes we there might be like an autism specialist in the public schools. That's a BCBA role, or like a, behavior interventionalist or something like this. But this really is like an all-encompassing behavior analytic approach to education. It reminds me of the Morningside model. Is that kind of a blueprint for you all as well? Or, what parts of that did you take or into consideration?
Well, shout out to Morningside, and we have some Morningside curricula, math fluency stuff at KABAS. So that's been really cool. We did take some, just my understanding and knowledge about Morningside, but also I really heavily looked at KABAS, Teachers College. A lot of the things that we implement are based on strategic science of teaching, which is really just engineering an environment that's conducive to learning for each kiddo. And really looking at it as a classroom, of course, and engineering that environment to address that for the kids. So I'd say yes, Morningside, for all of our fluency-based instruction, absolutely. We pulled a lot of that from there. We reached out to Morningside. They were really kind in sharing some of their curricula with us and stuff. But the AIL classrooms, the accelerated, oh my goodness, I forgot that, AIL at Teachers College. I got a chance to go over there for their conferences in New York, and I got to hang out in the classrooms throughout my doctoral program with Denise Ross and Doug Greer. And so a lot of the stuff we're doing is that it's really, you have a classroom and some of the kids may be getting DTT over here to, or a multiple exemplar instruction to get started. Another kid may be over here doing a full-blown lesson and writing, another kid, and then they all get back together and maybe they do a group-based, instruction. It was probably, I remember seeing it in my first year of doctoral program, and I just was inspired. And I was like, oh, wow, you can really apply the science to the entire classroom. And even though you might have to, shift there's logistics. The logistics are crazy on a daily basis.
Sure.
But we've gotten to a really good routine. So I'd say, yes, Morningside was an inspiration, but I think more so the Teachers College, the AIL classrooms, accelerated learning classrooms at Teachers College were much more of where I pulled a lot of what we're doing into KABAS.
Gotcha.
Yeah, that was one of my questions as well, just because I know you had said Jessica Van Stratton, and I will always struggle not calling her Dr.
I know.
Frieder. Yes. Jeff is a great guy. I love him, but he should change his name just to make it easier on us, But knowing that some of her students were there, and like when I was in her lab doing my doctorate, so many of the guys and gals, I should say, the people were going out and learning from Morningside directly. Like they had to go out to Seattle and have this great time, and here I am in Western Michigan getting beat up by consumers because that was my area of interest. I'm like, maybe I chose the wrong thing because they're having a great time out there. So interesting that you can just pull from a little bit of everything and how well it works together when you know the science as a whole. Yeah,
that's a great point, Steve. I think it's been helpful to have had, my experience with BATS and Dick Mala and, working with kids with autism, but then working with Denise, special education, and really extrapolate, like pulling those principles and applying them in a way that's meaningful. And then really looking at the full, spectrum. You got to have lessons. Our kids who have autism get older and they go to school, and this is really where, the niche, the sort of target population that KABAS is there to serve is like, well, what happens to those guys when they leave EIBI? They're not quite ready for group stuff, but maybe they have some of those verbal skills and they can maybe start to read and they can work on some writing and math or whatever, but then they get to a big classroom and they fall apart. And you don't really see anything until a year or two later when the behaviors are super intense and they've gotten suspended and maybe police has been called. Well, I think KABAS is a great space for those individuals, but also for those, a lot of the kids that we first were working with were neurotypical kids who were 2 to 3 grades behind in reading. And I found that the science was so applicable. These guys were able to advance really quickly. And I mean, in our first year, we've had our kids advance like 2 to 3 grade levels, just from instruction in 1 year. And some of the kids are neurotypical. Some of the kids are older and they have disabilities and, but so you pull from, special education, and you pull from, how the science is applied in that way, and from direct instruction, from LOVAS, from all these different sources of the science. And when you apply it all together and you see the big picture, and I think maybe the secret to that is, do you know what, ABA has, really provided, has contributed to education and special education? I think a lot of times we don't do the best job in, teaching people where to find those resources. And I've been really lucky to have access to that and was able to pull from all of that.
That was one of my questions too. Are there, sorry, did I interrupt you, Steve?
I was just going to say, anybody listening that's not familiar with direct instruction or how it works and how well it works, I always recommend checking out the follow through project and that data and that information, because the techniques work that well. But I also wanted to give you all credit for making it such a reinforcing environment too, because I think that kids ought to want to learn mentality that our society in general tends to approach things as is probably more problematic or as much problematic as the teaching techniques themselves as well.
Yeah.
And that was kind of getting into what my question was. Are there, barriers preventing our science from kind of sneaking into, public education as a whole? This is obviously a little more big picture here, but the two aren't often spoken of, synonymously.
Yeah. There are definitely some barriers to, for us to get into public school or classrooms and stuff. I think some of them are, we're just very technical, which is critical to the science. You can't have, I think behavior analysis without that technicality and application. But when you go into the classroom, you can't just, we cannot be as rigid. It's not, you have to be flexible in how you apply, and you have to really be a master of the principles to know how to apply them moment to moment. I think some of the barriers maybe are, people love to have their own bubble. I'm a teacher. Nobody will really believe like, yes, I teach reading. Yes, I teach math. I have a PhD in psychology, behavior analysis. What does that have to do with, the other? But, behavior is learning. And I think when we're going into schools and we don't really, oftentimes it's been my, and I've done work in schools for a long time. Oftentimes I think we go in ready to change stuff without actually investing in what has happened before I got, let me just be in the environment and learn and, do my qualitative research. We hate that word, but it's critical. You got to go in and be in the environment and understand it before you can try to shift it, before you can create change. But then we usually don't have a lot of time to create the change, right? And when you come in, you're already at odds a lot of the times, because it's like, well, your presence signifies that someone has failed to do something. That's a huge, who wants that? Like, there's already friction in that way. So I think it's maybe even how we have conversations with educators and teachers, and really they have a lot of knowledge that we don't have. And I feel like I learn every day. But at the same time, when I recommend stuff, and I've tried to recommend stuff, I really have to pause. Is this really feasible in this environment? And not in my head and what I know to be true, and what is the easiest way I can make this for this person? And how do I still build a relationship with them outside of this? And how do I talk their language? Okay, you gotta talk their language, because nobody cares about, all the really, technical words and language. Nobody cares about that. What they care about is, what are you gonna do to help my kid, help me help this kid so I can feel successful? And if you don't know how to talk about what they talk about, which is they might talk about feelings, and they might talk about, well, he just wasn't really feeling it. So you're going to have to be able to, yeah, that's true. But what if we do this? You know what I mean? So you really have to shift. You got to know audience control is critical, I think. That's a big barrier for us. Like, we have to know how to speak their language to make any impact, and for them to know, like, oh, they're on our side. So I think it's that relationship. And it's not all on us. I will say, I think that there's barriers for them, because again, our coming in signifies something went wrong. They didn't maybe do their job the way they needed to, or it was not enough resources, whatever their misconception might be. And so everything always typically starts with like at a friction point. And so our job is usually to, like they say, you got to condition yourself. Like it's a whole lot of stuff that you have to do before you can make a change, in my opinion. Nick, it looks like you.
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
Have a thought.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, just going off, Margo, what you just said about the barriers, it doesn't help that, in the past, there's been behavior analysts who have perhaps unwisely gone in with, a head of steam and saying, well, change this, change that. And public school educators, administrators alike both kind of get turned off to the field because of how aggressive we come in. But what I did also want to point out too is you mentioned it earlier about not just like the teaching technology, the difference between discrete trial training and then just what public schools, typically do. But also just like that mindset as well, that how we view behavior. It does feel like that both personally and professionally, there's more effort on treating problem behavior in public schools. There's been more legal movement, maybe not as much lately, but in the last 10 years, there's been more of a legal push with IEPs and those laws and things like that. But what's interesting is when you get those educators in a room, and this is just in my experience, so I don't want to overgeneralize, but in my experience, when you get those educators in the room, their temperament on how to treat those behaviors doesn't align with the mission in these documents, which is person-centered, person-focused, trying to do their best version of what they know, which is how can we help this learner accomplish what we need to accomplish. That's on paper, but then when you discuss these things in person, there is a little bit more of and maybe it's because I'm a behavior analyst, and again, sometimes we're a little bit scorned from the field, from education, but there's defensiveness, there's even at times aggressiveness that wasn't, I wasn't aggressive first or anything like that. It was just more of a general conversation, and you're starting to see like, okay, maybe there is some bad experiences with the field. And so I don't really have like a question to go with it, but it's just an observation I made that the temperament of behavior change and the legal proceedings that have preceded it don't always seem to align. There seems to be on paper an effort to change behavior, but then there's a temperamental barrier to how we view behavior and how kids ought to want to learn and how kids purposely make their teachers and classmates' lives difficult or disruptive or challenging.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a question of philosophy. There are two different philosophies operating whenever you're in a room, right? Or at least, that's what I think. And when you're philosophically misaligned, somebody's gonna have to really, get humble and go far beyond. Somebody's gonna have to. And I think oftentimes maybe we also come in with like, I have the data, I know what I'm doing and all of that. And sometimes like you have no idea what this man or lady has been dealing with for the last 6 months with 20 kids who do all of this stuff all day. It's very easy to, for things to shift. I think the other thing is like, yes, we do get called in usually for problem behavior, but typically in my experience, it's usually it's a skill deficit issue, whether it's literacy, whether it's verbal communication, functional communication, whatever it is, it's typically at the root, it's a skill deficit issue. And so when you get to that point and you still have to bring the teacher to the understanding, like, no, it's really, don't worry about the behavior. This person doesn't have this skill. That still points to them, oh, you didn't teach something, but you're a teacher, and so it feels personal. And so I think that's where I'm like, man, we got to figure out how to, and we're teachers too. And I think that's the other thing, really coming in as not just behavior analysts and scientists, but we're teachers. We may not be certified, but we are, obviously certified in a different way. But when you start to see yourself as a teacher and an educator and moment to moment and all the opportunities possible, you might shift your perspective as well when they're entering schools.
one more thing I would add too, and we don't have time to get into it, but there's the whole political side as well, and who's donating to whose campaign and a lot of those things too. And so anybody that wants to look at things a little bit more closely from a behavior analytics standpoint, it's an older book, but The War Against the Schools,
Yes.
Engelman is one to look at. Now, I worry about putting this out to the rest of society to look as a reference for things because he comes across as so angry that I think it may turn people off from our cause more than anything. But for behavior analysts that want to learn more about how some of these things work, especially from the political side, it's one to maybe read on your own time as well.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's a podcast. Oh my gosh, Kyle, I'll have to send this to you.
Yeah.
I should have added it on there. But I think it's called Tell a Story or The Reading Wars. It's on all the platforms. If you are an educator, a behavior analyst, so you really want to understand how we're in a state of, only 32% of fourth graders can read proficiently. And it's been, 20 years, all this time, the numbers still look like the numbers they did that, they had the statistics in 1992. You have to look at politically what's happening, who's in power, who's able to lift, to get access to those people in politics and, talk about their curricula, whether they're effective or not, whether there's, science, even if the science is one thing, but, so it's like, it's pretty complex. And my source has been individual teachers and educators often want to make the change and they're ready. But then the system, what they say, pit a good performer against a bad system and the system will always win. That's usually what's happening. It's true also for behavior analysts. If you have a great behavior analyst, but you have, maybe a company or organization that's not supporting their ethical practices or whatever that might be, you're going to see that change happen. So it's interesting you bring that up. I think that's a huge area that creates barriers that oftentimes we don't really know about, and the way that they have to operate and move within school districts and school systems in general.
Well, we are running low on time, but we would love to have you back sometime to talk about that history too, because that would be really interesting.
Yes.
Real quick, I just want to give you the opportunity to talk about just like funding, just in case, Derek Jeter's listening and wants to know how to help you guys out or something like that, being from the two areas. So how does that work just for anybody that may or want to aid you all?
Yeah, thank you, Steve, for being tough. I hope Derek Jeter, Oprah, whoever, everybody.
He's a big fan.
Yeah, I hope that they're listening to this. But funding at KABAS, we wanted to make KABAS accessible for all families. And so we use a sliding scale fee for parents, meaning, we have a full tuition, but we encourage parents to, pay as much as they can towards it so they can access the services. We rely heavily on donors. Public donations, because, the services we're doing ABA services within a school, it's expensive, and we have a pretty huge budget and we're at capacity right now for the number of kids that we can receive, but we want to build capacity. And more importantly, I think we want to sustain KABAS for a long period of time so that we can really make a difference in Kalamazoo and the surrounding areas. And so, we rely on donors. We recently partnered with the Kalamazoo Community Foundation. We have an endowment there so we can receive donations. Any small amount helps. I got to have staff that are committed and that feel comfortable and, have a secure job and are supported. And I don't want to have to retrain everyone every year because they're not getting compensated effectively. And so it's really important to me to make sure that the people who are teaching our children are taken care of so that they can take care of their children. And so that's a really big area. And of course, making sure the kids have what they need. So funding is always an area for us that I have to prioritize. This year, we've been, really blessed with some donors, but we're definitely in a space where we need more. And so, I could break it down more, but I think that that's enough to say we need some money, people.
What's your website?
Kalamazoo. Oh my goodness. Kalamazoo. Let me look. KalamazooSchool.org. And on there is a link for Give Now. If you click on it, it's kind of intuitive on how to give and how to support us. And it is a nonprofit organization, which means the donations and gifts that we receive are tax exempt.
Really cool. We'll definitely link it on the show notes too. So
awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, we're winding down. Margo, thanks so much for joining us today. Like I said before, we definitely love to have you back sometime to talk more about this stuff. There's so many different topics we could like rabbit hole down, but this is a good general overview of what you're doing and the cool work you're doing. So thanks again. And thanks for joining us on Cooperant Learning.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. I would love to come back and chat more. There's a lot to share, so it's hard to know where to start and stop and what to, but this has been great. Thank you guys for creating a platform that allows us to share about how behavior analysis can impact the community beyond the typical idea that we just serve in the autism world. We really serve in any person who has, something to learn. We're there. So come visit KABAS if you'd like. I'll give you a tour. It's really fun. You can see how the kids perform and what the staff are doing. And we'd love to have you over whenever you'd like.